Well, a warm welcome to the UxbridgeFM History Show. And as always, it's a pleasure to welcome Ken Pearce, who is here to talk about three Doomsday Manors. When you're ready, Ken.
In the Doomsday Book of 1086, there were 11 manors in what is now Hillingdon Borough. Today, we're going to look more closely at what that survey has to say about three of them: Cowley, Hillingdon, and Colham. At that time, manors were all self-supporting, dependent on what they themselves could produce. But life was often hard, especially in winter. Also, here is a quotation from a history of our area. Cowley, Hillingdon, and Colham were for many purposes so closely related that it is impossible to consider them apart. So there were no nice clear-cut boundaries between them, and eventually Hillingdon and Cowley were merged. So let's begin with Cowley. King William had decided to remove all the Saxon lords and replace them with his Norman followers. But in Cowley, that didn't happen, because Cowley had been in the ownership of Westminster Abbey. And in the Doomsday Book, we discover that the monks were allowed to retain their charge. So anyway, there must have been a church there for a start. North of the church was an area known for centuries as Cowley Field. To the south, there is still a property called Manor Farm. So this gives an indication of the size of the Manor of Cowley. The Doomsday Survey says that they had 2 ploughs in the manor, and there was pasture and meadow land for livestock. A mill is listed, which must have been on the River Colne, I think, and therefore detached from the rest of the manorial lands. There was woodland for 40 pigs, for at that time pigs were completely wild animals. 2 villagers and a cottager are mentioned. As an amateur historian, I cannot possibly estimate the size of the population, but it was small. Now, next to Hillingdon Manor. Before 1066, the lord of the manor is recorded as being a thane called Ulf, spelt U-L-F. He was replaced by Earl Roger. Now, this is Roger de Montgomery, William the Conqueror's cousin, and he was given a large number of manors up and down the country, including locally Colham, Harmondsworth, Dawley, and Ickenham. But he was also given the titles Earl of Arundel and Earl of Shrewsbury. So I think it's probable that he never bothered to visit any of the local manors. Although the Hillingdon entry says 2 Frenchmen were living there with 2 men under them. Well, now, that suggests to me that they may have been deliberately placed there as stewards for Earl Roger to look after the day-to-day affairs of the manor. We know that the manor house of Hillingdon was where Bishopsthorpe School is today, and we know there was a church at Hillingdon. But the priest is shown living in Colham, where there was no church. 1,000 pigs lived wild in the woodland. There were 3 ploughs and a weir, indicating that fish was on the menu. The manor was centred on Hillingdon village, but the area around Long Lane would have been part. Finally, let's have a quick look at Colham Manor, the largest of the 3. There were 10 ploughs available and 400 pigs in the woods. 10 villagers, 10 smallholders, 4 cottagers, and 8 slaves. But my sense is that these slaves were not badly treated. They weren't brutally handled. They just happened to be the lowest level of society at the time, and they probably got all the menial jobs. A vineyard existed, showing that the climate at the time of the Doomsday Survey was quite mild. There were 2 mills on the River Colne. The manor lands stretched from what is now North Uxbridge all the way down to Useley. And by the way, Uxbridge existed was such a small settlement that it wasn't worthy of mention in the Doomsday Survey at all. So, to conclude, we have a glimpse of what our area was like 900 years ago. Very few people living in clearings between the trees, I suppose, and battling against nature to survive. But everywhere must have been unbelievably quiet.
Thanks, Ken. I think a few changes have gone on since then, but nobody will notice.